The Autobiography of Martin Luther King Jr. was written by Martin Luther King in 1998. Revolution needs leaders, and the best one changes the mind of the oppressors as well as liberating the oppressed. Along ways of life, someone must have the sense enough and morality enough to cut off the chain of hate and evil. The greatest way to do that is through love. To deprive man of freedom is to relegate him to the status of a thing rather than elevate him to the status of person. Man must be treated as a means to an end of the state, but always as an end within himself. King's "I Have a Dream" speech at the March on Washington in August 1963 is one of history's greater orations, and he was perhaps the greatest 20th century civil rights activist. But how much do we really know about King and what drove him? As the focus of many high-profile protests such as Montgomery bus boycott, he forced the American public and its political leaders, including several US presidents, to deal with and respond to his agenda. King's influence on black Americans is far-reaching and led to what he refers to as the New Negro, which was free of the stereotypes of the black male. Figures as diverse as film director like Spike Lee, musician James Brown, boxer Muhammad Ali, and of course President Barack Obama have been inspired by his outlook and rhetoric. Martin Luther King was born in 1929, the son of a Baptist pastor. King had a relatively comfortable upbringing. Growing up, he fell drawn to the ministry himself, yet had from the start a cautioning mind, and so would not accept anything uncritically. As a student, he studied the works of Marx, Hobbes, Milk, Rousseau, and Nietzsche, but did not find intellectual and moral satisfaction in them. Though attracted to Marxism, he felt that the materialism of Marx's view of history left no room for God, and he did not believe that totalitarianism was ever justified. King had learned from a young age the dangers of retaliation in the face of oppression, and so was attracted by Gandhi's approach of non-violence as a form of power. The hope was expressed in the rising expectation of freedom and justice. What was new about Mahatma Gandhi's movement in India was that he mounted a revolution on hope and love, hope and non-violence. The bravery to stand up to the status quo would arise from the theory, King said, and the tactics for how to do it. It would come from Gandhi. King chose to emphasize that black Americans were citizens and were determined to apply our citizenship to the fullness of its meaning. The protesters made the headlines, and as the figurehead of the movement, King was put on the cover of Time magazine. He drilled protesters not to retaliate to police violence. Taking the moral high ground would shame the oppressors. King noted that since the Declaration of Independence, America has manifested a schizophrenic personality on the question of race, segregation and discrimination. He said, are strange paradoxes in a nation founded on the principle that all men are created equal. The Supreme Court ruling that Alabama's racial segregation laws for buses were unconstitutional gave the movement legal ammunition in its larger struggle in Atlanta, Alabama, and Selma. A person participates in this society preliminarily as an economic entity. At rock bottom, we are neither poets, athletes, not artists. Our existence is centered on the fact that we are consumers because we must eat and have shelter to live. Indeed, the March on Washington event was built as being about black economic rights and opportunities rather than racial injustice per se. Although Kings never formally endorsed a presidential candidate or indeed a sitting president, he admired the Kennedys and lauded President Johnson for his understanding of the connection between discrimination and poverty, as well his awareness that if America does not use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty and make it possible for all God's children to have the basic necessities of life, she will go to hell. When thanks to LBJ and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were finally passed, it was obviously a great victory for political equality, but more importantly, it allowed for black American economic emancipation. Despite politicians warning him to stick to civil rights, King campaigned against American involvement in Vietnam, which he thought unconscionable, particularly the disproportionate amount of poor people who had been sent to fight. If America's souls become totally poisoned, he said, part of the autopsy must read Vietnam. He wanted America to lead the world in a moral sense, pushing for justice, equality, and democracy, not as self-appointed world policeman. King was only really getting into his stride as a world statesman for justice at the time of his assassination in 1968, and it is natural to wonder what else he might have achieved. Would pressure on South Africa to free Nelson Mandela have come 20 years sooner? Would the war in Vietnam have ended earlier? Could he have done something to reduce the disproportionate amount of time that black men spend in prison, thus destroying their families and their economic chances? Not long ago his death, King was in a strangely reflective mood. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We have got some difficult days ahead. But it really does not matter with me now, because I have been to the mountain top and I don't mind like anybody. I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I am not concerned about the now. I just want to do God's will. It is easy to overlook just how much King's faith illuminated his life and work. What made him rise above a figure like Malcolm X was his compassion for humanity, not only African Americans, and his ethic of Christian love was as powerful as any Gandhian concept. His greatness also flowed from his grounding in philosophy. Hegel's dialectic suggested to him that growth comes from struggle, and therefore political struggle was natural to humans if they wanted to move ahead. His life was infused with a Kantian respect for the individual, whom he said must never be treated as a means to the end of the state, but always as an end within himself. Beyond his actual achievements in politics, it is King's ability to convey the sacred potential and dignity of the individual that continues to inspire.